Hi, Dr. Jessica Deal here. I'm an academic writing coach and published researcher. Today I'm going to talk about what I like to call the rejection carousel. In this video, I'll name 6 distinct types of academic rejection: personal, physical, expensive, invisible, institutional, and by design. Each one is real, each one requires a different response. Until you can see all of them clearly, it's hard to navigate any of them well. When we talk about rejection in academic publishing, we usually mean one thing: the email from the editor. Desk rejection, post-review rejection, the R&R that eventually went nowhere. That's real, but that's not the whole picture. Rejection in academic life is an ongoing carousel ride. It runs before the email arrives and after it's been dealt with. It lives in the body. It shows up at the dinner table. It's embedded in the metrics your institution uses to evaluate you. And for a significant portion of the global research community, it's built into the infrastructure of who academic publishing was designed for and who it wasn't. This video maps all of it, not to make you feel worse about a system that's genuinely difficult, but because naming the full shape of something is the first step to navigating it. You can't read a map you don't have. 6 stops on the carousel. Let's go. The first stop is the most personal, and the one with the longest reach. Last year, I received a revise and resubmit that hit deep. Reviewer 3 had 4 comments. The other reviewers, 2 other reviewers, had filled pages. Reviewer 3 had 4 comments. The introduction is very long and risks losing the reader. You should better justify your choices. The figures are truly terrible, and the results seem very self-referential. I stared at those 4 sentences. I went through the sequence I think most researchers go through. Defensive at first, then angry, then afraid. Because what if reviewer 3 was right? What if the other 2 were being kind, and this one was being honest? That sequence, defensive, angry, afraid, it wasn't my personal failing. It's what happens when feedback arrives without context, without accountability, without the basic courtesy of specificity. I can't revise truly terrible. I can only absorb it. But here's what I want you to notice. That sequence started before the email. Before reviewer 3 had written a word, I'd already have heard that voice. The paper isn't ready. The argument isn't strong enough. Who am I to be contributing to this conversation? We call this imposter syndrome as though naming it resolves it. It doesn't. What it actually is, and I say this as a behavioral scientist, is a rational adaptation to an evaluative environment that withholds information, moves goalposts, and occasionally hands you a reviewer who thinks your figures are truly terrible without telling you why. The internal voice learned from the external one. It just kept going after the external one went quiet. The personal rejection has the longest reach of all the stops on this carousel. External rejections are periodic, but the internal one runs in a loop. Okay, so I know where rejection sits in my body. It's a sharp pain in my right shoulder blade. It shows up when I look at a looming deadline, when I realize the analysis doesn't quite support the argument, when I try to make sense of contradictory reviewer comments. Before any external verdict has arrived, my shoulder blade already knows something is at stake. This is not a metaphor. This is literally my nervous system doing its job. The research on this is unambiguous. Social rejection and physical danger travel the same neural pathways. The alarm that fires when you open a rejection email is not categorically different from the alarm that fires when you step into traffic. Your brain catches up eventually and says, this is just a journal. This is just a reviewer. This is just an email. But your body has already been there for several seconds, doing what it learned to do. Which is why avoidance is so often misread. We call it procrastination. We call it a motivation problem. but it's the body protecting itself from anticipated pain. If opening emails from journals has historically produced a specific physical experience, your nervous system will find reasons not to open them. That's adaptation, not avoidance. The next time you find yourself circling the paper, unable to sit down and write, unable to open the inbox, check in before you diagnose yourself. Where is it sitting? What is it actually telling you? All right, nobody tells you about the time cost. The rule of thumb for tenure track is 1 paper per year. It sounds manageable until you do the math. A paper takes 3 months to write if you're focused and nothing sidetracks you. Good luck with that. And then you submit. Then you wait for acknowledgement, for a desk decision, for reviewers to be assigned, for reviewers to actually review. I had 1 paper sit in a journal's backlog for 2 years between acceptance and publication. The paper was 3 years old by the time anyone could cite it. That's not unusual. It's just not talked about. Rejection adds cost at every stage. A desk rejection is relatively cheap, painful but fast. The expensive rejection is the one that comes after 6 months of review, asks for major revisions, and then rejects the revision 6 months later. You spent a year in a paper that's now back at the beginning. The cover letter needs rewriting, the references need reformatting for a new journal style guide, the argument might need repositioning for a different audience, and the clock, for those on tenure track or fixed-term contracts, has kept moving the entire time. None of this is secret information. It's just information that most of us don't have when we need it. Okay, now, there's no cultural script for a desk rejection. Nobody brings your food. Nobody asks how you're holding up. Nobody knows to ask. The grief of rejection of a paper you couldn't finish or a submission you delayed for 6 months because the anxiety of sending it out was worse than the anxiety of sitting on it doesn't have a public form. It lives in you silently while everything around you keeps moving. Maybe some of you can relate to this. I had a partner for a long time who didn't understand this. They knew I published. They'd watch papers go out and come back and go out again and eventually get published. So why, they wanted to know, was I still anxious about it? They said, "You've done this before. You're good at it." The logic was reasonable. The logic was wrong. The anxiety wasn't about whether I could do it. It was about what it cost every time. The waiting, the exposure, the vulnerability of sending something I believed in out into a system that evaluates it anonymously and returns a judgment without explanation. That cost doesn't go away with experience. If anything, it compounds, because the more you publish, the more you have to lose. The people around you are not trying to get it wrong. They just don't have the map. And most of us don't hand it to them because we're not sure we have it ourselves. Okay, so I once sat in a department meeting and watched a PowerPoint slide go up on the screen, comparing citation metrics across departments. Our department, a design program, was near the bottom. The slide had come from the provost's office. The message was clear: publish or perish. There was no acknowledgement of why the numbers looked the way they did. Design research, like social science research, like mixed methods research, like qualitative research, publishes differently than lab-based quantitative science. The journals are different, the citation cultures are different, the timelines are different. A paper in a high-impact biomedical journal will accumulate citations at a rate that a paper in a design or urban studies journal simply will not. Not because the work is less rigorous or less important, but because the field is smaller. The readership is more specialized, and the metrics were not calibrated for it. The H index, the impact factor, the citation count, these are not neutral instruments. They were built in and for specific disciplines and applied universally as though disciplinary context doesn't exist. When a provost office ranks departments side by side using these tools, what looks like measurement is actually comparison across unequal categories. The department head with the slide is not your enemy. They're operating inside a system that handed them the wrong tools and told them to measure anyway. That doesn't make it less damaging. It just means the anger has no useful target, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. Okay, I want to say something I've seen from the inside of peer review, and I want to say it plainly. When a paper is written by a researcher whose first language is not English, there's a subset of reviewers who cannot see past the syntax. The argument might be original, the methodology might be rigorous, the findings might be genuinely significant. Yet the reviewer will spend 3 paragraphs critiquing sentence structure. I've read comments that recommended rejection on the basis of language alone. I've read comments that framed grammatical irregularities as evidence of unclear thinking, as though the two are the same thing, as though every idea that's ever moved a field forward arrived in perfect, polished sentences. This is not a rogue reviewer problem. It's a systems problem. The academic publishing infrastructure was built in and for a specific linguistic and geographic context. The majority of high-impact journals publish in English. The majority of editorial boards are based in North America and Western Europe. The peer review system is anonymous, which means bias has no accountability and no human face. A reviewer who cannot distinguish between a language barrier and an intellectual one will never be corrected. Will never know they caused harm, will never see the researcher on the other side of their comments, that the researcher is trying to decide whether to revise or abandon or simply stop submitting. Nobody designed this to harm any specific person. It just produces harm systematically, at scale, without accountability, and with extraordinary consistency. I name it here without hesitation. Whew. All right. After my 3rd rejection, at the prompting of that editor, I bought Wendy Belcher's Writing Your Journal article in 12 weeks, which I highly recommend. Then I sat down with my paper and started working through it. And I realized I'd been performing academic writing. I knew the jargon, I knew how to sound like a researcher, I knew how to organize a report of what I'd done, background, methods, findings, discussion. I thought a journal paper was a container for a project. You know, you do the research, then you put it in the paper. But that's not what a journal paper is. A journal paper is one idea. One singular contribution, large or small, offered to a conversation already in progress. The question isn't, what did I find? It's, what am I adding and to whom and why does it matter now? When I stopped and asked those questions, everything shifted. It became obvious what belonged in the paper and what was tangential. I rewrote it, not revised, rewrote. And it became 2 papers, 2 acceptances, 2 lines on my CV. Not every rejection has a useful indicator. A desk rejection from a mismatched journal tells you almost nothing about your work, but the pattern over time becomes legible. The question shifts from what does this say about me to what does this tell me about my next step? The researchers who publish prolifically are not the ones who avoid rejection. They're the ones who've learned to read it. All right, so here's the full carousel map in one slide. 6 stops. Each one is real, each one distinct. Each one requires a different response, which is why treating all of them as the same thing, which is what happens when we collapse everything into rejection, leaves us without the right tools. The personal stop asks you to notice the internal voice and not obey it automatically. The physical stop asks you to check in with your body before you diagnose your behavior as laziness or avoidance. The expensive stop asks you to track your time and build a pipeline. The invisible stop asks you to say it out loud to someone, somewhere, even if just here. The institutional stop asks you to know your discipline's norms well enough to push back on metrics that weren't built for you. And the systemic stop asks you to name structural bias plainly, because it's not yours to fix alone, and it should not be yours to absorb in silence. That's the map. Take a screenshot and keep it somewhere useful. The carousel doesn't stop. You get off it, you get on it, sometimes the same horse, sometimes a new one, and you realize at some point that almost everyone around you was writing to, even if they're not waving in recognition. What I've found in working with researchers across a lot of different contexts and career stages is that the single most useful thing is often just naming it. Not fixing it, not reframing it into something positive, just saying, this is what it looks like for me. This is where it sits. This is the stop that costs me the most. That's a conversation I'd love to continue in the Publish It community called The Watering Hole. The link's in the description and it's free to join. Use this prompt and join the conversation. What does your stop on the carousel look like? Come find us. And if this video resonated with you, share it with a researcher who needs it. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do for each other is give a little wave and say, hey, I'm on this carousel too. So which stop in the carousel costs you the most? The personal, the physical, the expensive, the invisible, the institutional, or the one that's by design? Tell me what that looks like for you below in the comments. This video complements Draft It, the essential 10-week workshop, a self-paced tutorial to draft your journal paper from abstract to conclusion. Draft It covers topics including how to structure your journal paper, articulating your core argument, writing and refining your introduction and literature review, basic contents and organization, concluding and finishing. It includes but goes beyond the standard IMRAD content. Remember, IMRAD is the acronym for the standard journal selections that include introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Draft It helps you tackle the two most fundamental, essential, critical elements of what elevator research report into a publishable journal paper: a clearly articulated core argument and the structure that supports your entire paper. So if you're ready to publish it, register for Draft It. Register for the self-paced course and you'll have unlimited access so you can start anytime, now, next month, or next year. Find the link in my bio. Thank you for watching this video. Check out my other videos on publishing your research in a peer-reviewed journal paper. Be sure to subscribe as I upload new content monthly.